I died once. 78 seconds of silence, while my family posed for photographs at a glittering charity gala and my husband rehearsed his grief for the cameras. My name is Ava, and this is the story of how Miles, the man I loved, the man I trusted with every piece of myself, thought he could erase me. But you can't erase someone who refuses to stay buried. If you had met Miles, you would have liked him. Everyone did. He had that easy, magnetic charm that made people feel chosen in his presence. At fundraisers, he glided through the crowd like a conductor leading an orchestra, every handshake perfectly timed, every smile dazzling. He remembered names, details, secrets, and he made people believe he cared. But behind the locked doors of our penthouse, that charm was a mask. His voice sharpened like broken glass, his patience snapped at the smallest provocation. He was not cruel enough to leave bruises, not reckless enough to let the mask slip in public, but in private I learned the truth. His kindness had an expiration date. Still, I stayed. Because love is clever at inventing excuses. At first, the warning signs felt small. Phone calls that cut off the moment I stepped into the room. Unfamiliar names on bank transfers. Late nights at the office that turned into dawn. I wanted to believe him when he smiled and said, "Ava, you worry too much. Trust me." So I did. Until the night, I almost didn't wake up. I'd been ill for weeks, weakness spreading through my body like an unseen fog. My legs trembled, my chest ached. Dizzy spells sent me grasping at walls. Miles played the doting husband, arranging the best doctors, making sure cameras caught him whispering reassurances as I was wheeled through hospital corridors. The perfect picture of devotion. But as they prepped me for surgery, I saw something in his eyes that didn't match the mask. Not fear. Not love. Relief. The last thing I remember before the anesthesia dragged me under was his voice, low in my ear. "Don't worry. You won't feel a thing." He was right. I felt nothing. Because for 78 seconds, I was gone. When I woke, I wasn't in recovery. I wasn't even in the same hospital. The clean white walls had been replaced with peeling paint and buzzing fluorescent lights. My wrist was bare where my medical bracelet had been. No charts at the foot of my bed. No familiar staff. No record of my existence. To the world, I no longer existed. Miles hadn't just betrayed me. He had erased me. In the days that followed, whispers drifted through the walls. Nurses thought I was unconscious when they spoke, but I listened. Words like transfer, settlement, insurance. And then, the cruelest one, widow. Miles had already signed the papers. He was cashing in. My family, blinded by his rehearsed grief, believed the story. My parents wore black. My siblings sent flowers. They wept over a woman they thought was buried 6 feet under while I lay hidden, breathing, furious. He had staged the perfect tragedy. And I was meant to disappear quietly, tucked away in this forgotten corner of the city until sickness, or something more deliberate, finished the job. But he underestimated me. The first time I stood, the world tilted so violently, I nearly collapsed. My legs shook, my lungs burned, but I clung to the bed rail until my knuckles whitened. Each step was agony, but also a declaration. I would not vanish. I would not give him the ending he wrote for me. One night, while the nurse dozed in her chair, I unhooked the 4 from my arm and slipped into the hall. My body trembled with weakness, but rage steadied me more than any medicine could. Outside, the city lights flickered against the night sky. The cold air stung my skin, but it felt like freedom. I was no ghost. I was alive. And I was coming back. The city swallowed me whole the night I walked out of that clinic. I had no money, no identification, nothing but the hospital gown clinging to my skin and the fire in my veins. The streets blurred past me in streaks of neon and shadow until I collapsed against a wall in an alley, trembling. A woman found me there. She smelled of cigarettes and lavender, her hair pulled back with a scarf. "You look like hell," she muttered, kneeling down. I could barely whisper my name, but it was enough. She helped me up, half carrying me to a cramped apartment above a pawn shop. Her name was Marisol. She didn't ask questions, not at first. She fed me soup, gave me clothes that hung loose on my frame, let me sleep for days. When I woke, stronger, she finally spoke the truth I had been afraid to say aloud. You weren't supposed to leave that clinic alive, were you? I met her gaze and didn't flinch.
No.
My husband made sure of that. Marisol leaned back, exhaling smoke toward the cracked ceiling. Then you're lucky. Most ghosts don't get second chances. I wasn't sure if it was luck or something darker, but she was right. I was supposed to be gone. Instead, I was here, and every heartbeat felt like borrowed time I refused to waste. Marisol had lived enough years on the edge of survival to know how to hide someone. She gave me a new name to use when I ventured outside, coached me on how to move like I belonged. Bit by bit, my strength returned, and with it, my rage crystallized into something sharper: purpose. While the world mourned Ava, the dutiful wife, I began watching Miles from the shadows. The first time I saw him again was on television. He stood behind a podium, dressed in black, eyes wet with crocodile tears as he thanked the community for their condolences. His voice broke at all the right moments. The audience believed every word. I didn't. Behind him, a banner displayed the name of a foundation he had launched in my memory: the Ava Sinclair Foundation for Cardiac Research. He had turned my supposed death into a brand, a charity, a publicity stunt. Donations poured in. He smiled for the cameras, patted shoulders, accepted sympathy. And I felt something cold and electric surge through me. He had built an empire on my grave. I would burn it down. The first step was information. I haunted the places he thought were safe: the lobby of his office building, the coffee shop across from his penthouse, the marble halls of charity galas where he dazzled strangers. I became a shadow in his world, listening, watching. What I found only deepened my fury. Miles wasn't content with my erasure. He was building something larger, laundering donations through shell companies, hiding money offshore, pulling strings with politicians who owed him favors. My death wasn't just convenient, it was profitable. Every smile he flashed, every laugh he faked, every speech he gave, it was all soaked in my blood. One night, I slipped into his office. The security guards barely noticed me, a nobody in a cleaning crew uniform. His desk was exactly as I remembered: polished mahogany, perfectly arranged. But beneath the neat surface, secrets pulsed. Bank statements, fake contracts, a ledger with names and numbers that told the truth he worked so hard to hide. I copied everything. Back at Marisol's apartment, I spread the evidence across the floor like puzzle pieces. And for the first time since the operating table, I smiled. Miles thought he was untouchable. He thought he had erased me. But now I had the proof to erase him. Still, evidence wasn't enough. Men like Miles didn't fall because of paperwork. They fell because someone pushed them hard until the mask cracked in front of the world. So I began to plan not just his destruction, but his unraveling. The first strike had to be small, psychological, a whisper in the dark to make him doubt his own sanity. I mailed him a single envelope. Inside, a photo of us, taken on our wedding day, my smile radiant, his eyes sharp with ambition. On the back, I wrote 3 words: "You forgot me." I didn't sign it. I imagined the way his breath must have caught when he read it, the way his heart stuttered. Because how could he explain receiving a message from the dead? Days later, I saw him again at a gala. The mask was still in place, but his smile faltered once, just for a moment, when a camera flash reminded him of mine. That was enough. The cracks had begun to form, and I would be there, widening them, until the whole facade collapsed. Miles didn't crack all at once. Men like him rarely did. They chipped away slowly, the mask slipping in fragments until one day, there was nothing left underneath. My job was to speed up the process. The first letter unsettled him. I knew it because, 2 days later, I saw him in the lobby of his office building, snapping at his assistant. His voice was sharper than usual, his smile forced. He kept glancing at the doors, as if expecting someone to walk through them. Someone like me. That paranoia was a seed, and I intended to water it. The next envelope carried a copy of his secret ledger. The real one stayed with me, but the photocopy was enough to remind him how dangerous his own records could be. I mailed it to his office with no note, no return address. Just the cold echo of his crimes staring back at him. He dismissed half his staff the next week. I watched from across the street as boxes piled up in the arms of assistants who had once worshipped him. Rumors trickled through the city like poison. Miles Sinclair was losing his grip. But it wasn't enough. Revenge, I realized, wasn't about a single blow. It was about erosion. Slowly stripping away the certainty a man like Miles built his empire on. Making him doubt his allies, his control, even his own mind. So I haunted him. I slipped a photo of myself into the seat pocket of his car, so when he reached for his briefcase, he found my face staring back at him. I left lipstick-stained glasses on the tables of restaurants where he dined, so the servers whispered about the mystery woman who seemed to vanish before dessert. I called his office from untraceable phones, saying nothing, just letting the silence stretch until he slammed the receiver down. It worked. His speeches grew erratic, his charm flickered under pressure. Investors started asking questions. Politicians avoided his calls. For the first time, the golden boy of the city began to sweat. And I wasn't alone anymore. Marisol, who had saved me when I stumbled out of the clinic, had friends, people who owed her favors, people who lived in the shadows, hackers who could slip past firewalls, journalists hungry for a story, men and women who had been broken by Miles in ways I hadn't known. One of them was Daniel. He had once worked for Miles, managing the foundation's finances. When he refused to cook the books any further, Miles destroyed him, blacklisted him, ruined his career, left him in debt so deep he almost drowned. Daniel was wary at first when I approached him, but when he saw the evidence I carried, something in him ignited. "I thought no one would ever take him down," he said, voice shaking. "I thought he was untouchable." "No one is untouchable," I answered. "Not when they've built everything on lies." With Daniel's help, I uncovered more than I ever expected. Offshore accounts, fraudulent contracts, politicians who owed Miles favors. The kind of rot that, once exposed, would collapse his empire in days. But exposure alone wasn't enough. I wanted him broken before the world saw the truth. I wanted him to feel every ounce of fear he had forced on me. So I devised a game. One night, I sent him a package. Inside was a small voice recorder, the kind reporters used. When he pressed play, he heard my voice. "You thought I was gone, Miles. But shadows remember. Every lie, every betrayal, every time you whispered, 'Trust me.' Did you think I wouldn't hear? Did you think I wouldn't come back?" The recording ended there. But it was enough. The next morning, the news reported that Miles had canceled 3 meetings, claiming illness. His face appeared pale on the screens, his smile stretched too thin. The cracks were widening. Still, he wasn't broken yet. The final straw, I knew, would have to be public. Something so undeniable that no amount of charm could erase it. So I waited, and the opportunity came sooner than I expected. The Ava Sinclair Foundation, my foundation, the empire he had built on my supposed death, was hosting its annual gala. Politicians, investors, celebrities, the city's most powerful would be in attendance. And Miles would stand at the podium, smile gleaming, grief rehearsed, accepting praise for his devotion to the memory of his late wife. It was the perfect stage. I planned for weeks, gathering footage, documents, testimonies. Daniel worked nights hacking into Miles's private accounts, pulling data no one else could reach. Marisol's contacts spread whispers in the right circles. By the time the gala arrived, I had everything I needed. The night of the event, I didn't slip through the back door. I walked through the front, head held high, dressed in black silk that clung to my frame. My hair was swept back, my lips painted the deep red Miles used to love. Every head turned, gasps echoed, because to them, I was supposed to be dead, and there I was very much alive. Miles froze on stage. For a moment, his mask cracked entirely. His eyes widened, his breath caught. The crowd murmured, confused, electrified. "Ava," someone whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My presence was enough to shatter the illusion. Miles tried to recover, stammering into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please, there must be some mistake." But the screens behind him lit up, hijacked by Daniel's work. Images flashed, bank records, secret accounts, contracts signed in the shadows. Miles's crimes, laid bare for the entire city to see. The room erupted in chaos. Reporters shouted questions. Investors whispered furiously. Politicians slipped out the doors, their ties to Miles now a liability. And I stood there, watching the empire he built on my grave collapse in real time. For the first time in years, I felt alive. The gala ended in chaos. Security rushed the stage, reporters shoved microphones forward, and Miles tried to shout over the roar. His voice, once commanding, now sounded shrill, desperate. The cameras caught every second, his stammer, the sweat dripping down his temple, the fury flashing across his face when he thought no one was watching. And me? I walked out calmly, each step deliberate, my heels clicking against the marble floor like gunshots. People parted for me as though I were untouchable, a ghost returned from the grave. The headlines the next morning were merciless. Dead wife returns, husband exposed. Miles Sinclair, philanthropist or fraud? The resurrection of Avis Sinclair shatters the city. I sat in Marisol's apartment with the papers spread around me, sipping coffee as my face stared back from a dozen front pages. For the first time in years, the world was finally seeing me, not as a victim, but as proof that truth had claws. But I knew Miles wouldn't surrender easily. Men like him didn't fade quietly into the night. They clawed, they bit, they fought until there was nothing left. And Miles was already sharpening his teeth. Within days, his lawyers flooded the media with statements. Mistaken identity. An imposter preying on tragedy. An elaborate scam. They tried to paint me as a fraud, a desperate woman looking to exploit grief for fame. But the city wasn't buying it. Not after the documents, the footage, the proof. That only made Miles more dangerous. The first warning came when Marisol's window shattered one night. A bullet lodged itself in the wall inches above my head. By the time we scrambled to the street, the car was gone. Marisol cursed, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. He's scared. That makes him sloppy. But it also makes him lethal. She was right. From then on, I moved like a shadow, never staying in one place too long. Daniel helped me set up safe houses, each one stocked with cash, burner phones, supplies. I learned to sleep lightly, one hand curled around a knife under my pillow. And yet, part of me relished it. Because every attempt he made to silence me was proof that I had him cornered. Still, I couldn't just play defense. If I wanted to end this, I had to strike harder. So I began dismantling him piece by piece. First, I leaked his offshore accounts to the authorities. Overnight, millions were frozen, his assets untouchable. Then, I fed journalists the testimonies of the people he had crushed, former employees, ruined business partners, silenced whistleblowers. Their voices, once ignored, now roared across headlines. The final blow came when I exposed the politicians who had taken his money. They turned on him instantly, desperate to sever ties before they sank with him. Miles Sinclair, once untouchable, was now radioactive. But still, he clung to survival. One night, I found him waiting for me. It was in one of the safe houses, a dim, empty apartment on the edge of the city. I opened the door and froze. He was sitting in the dark, his suit wrinkled, his tie loose, a gun resting casually in his hand. "Ava," he said, his voice raw. "You should have stayed dead." I didn't move. My heart thundered, but I forced my voice steady. "And miss this? Watching you crumble? No, Miles. I wouldn't trade this for anything." His jaw clenched. He stood, raising the gun. For a moment, I saw the man I had once loved, the charm that had fooled me for years. But now his eyes burned with something else. Rage, desperation, fear. "You think you've won?" he spat. "You think anyone cares about you? You're nothing without me. You always were." I laughed. It startled him, the sound slicing through the tension like glass. "No, Miles," I said. I was nothing because of you.
But now?
Now I'm the woman who destroyed you. The gun shook in his hand. He was unraveling, every thread snapping at once. And then, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Daniel burst through the door, followed by 2 officers. Miles barely had time to turn before they tackled him, the gun clattering across the floor. He thrashed, screaming my name like a curse, but the cuffs clicked shut. The officers dragged him away, his fury echoing down the hall. I stood frozen, my chest heaving, as the weight of it all crashed over me. For years, I had been his shadow, his victim, his ghost. And now I had turned into his executioner. But revenge, I realized, wasn't clean. It didn't heal the scars. It didn't erase the nights on the operating table, the screams I swallowed, the years I lost. It only ended one story, his. Mine was still unwritten. The night Miles was arrested, the city didn't sleep. News channels replayed the footage of him being dragged out of the building, his once perfect hair disheveled, his face twisted with fury. For years, he had been the untouchable golden boy. Now he looked like what he truly was, a cornered predator, stripped of his mask. I should have felt satisfaction. And part of me did. But the bigger part knew this was only the beginning. Because men like Miles didn't just rot quietly in a cell. They clawed for every scrap of power, every chance to twist the story. And the world loved a scandal. The trial was set within months. The charges: fraud, embezzlement, attempted murder. The prosecutors built their case around the evidence Daniel and I had unearthed, the accounts, the forged contracts, the testimonies. But I was their key witness. The wife who had died on the table and come back to expose the man who tried to erase her. Walking into that courtroom the first day felt like stepping onto a stage. Reporters crowded the steps, flashes lit the air, voices shouted questions I ignored. Inside, the jury's eyes followed me as I sat down, every movement heavy with meaning. Then they brought Miles in. He wore the same suit I had once picked out for him, though it hung loose now. His smile flickered weakly as he scanned the room, landing on me. His eyes burned with the same venom I had seen in the safe house. He leaned close to his lawyer, whispering, but never stopped staring at me. I refused to look away. The first week dragged through financial records, expert witnesses, former employees testifying about shady deals. The courtroom buzzed with tension, but I knew what everyone was waiting for: my testimony. When my turn came, the silence was suffocating. The prosecutor asked me to state my name. My voice rang clear. Ava Sinclair. Gasps rippled through the room. Even after the gala, even after the headlines, some people still hadn't believed it. But there I was, flesh and blood, speaking the name they thought had been buried. I told them everything. The marriage that had looked perfect from the outside but rotted inside. The operating table. The moment I realized the man holding my hand was planning my death. The years of betrayal hidden under his charm. Every word I spoke was a blade. And I watched the jury flinch as they cut. Miles's lawyer tried to rattle me on cross-examination. He called me unstable, accused me of staging my death for attention, claimed I had forged evidence. But I didn't waver. For every accusation, I had proof. For every lie, I had truth. At one point, Miles snapped, slamming his hand on the table. "She's lying," he shouted, veins bulging in his neck. The judge's gavel cracked. The jury stared. And I smiled. Because that outburst wasn't planned. That was the mask slipping. As the trial stretched on, the city divided. Some still clung to his image, unable to reconcile the man they admired with the monster revealed. Others turned against him completely, furious they had been duped. But the tide was turning. One night, I walked past the courthouse steps after a long day. A woman approached me, her hands trembling as she held a faded photograph. "He ruined my husband," she whispered. "Took everything from us. But you gave us back our voices." Her eyes filled with tears as she pressed the photo into my hands. I didn't know what to say. For so long, I had lived in shadows, consumed by my own pain. Now I realized my fight wasn't just mine. It was for everyone he had silenced. The trial stretched for weeks, But the end came suddenly. The prosecution played the final piece of evidence, a recording Daniel had dug up from a forgotten server. Miles's voice, cold and unmistakable. Once she's gone, the foundation will be unstoppable. No one questions a grieving husband. The courtroom went still. The jury stared. Even his lawyer looked defeated. And Miles, for the first time, looked afraid. The verdict came 2 days later. Guilty on all counts. The sentence, life in prison without parole. Reporters flooded the steps, shouting questions, flashing cameras. But their noise faded into the background as I stood there, the autumn wind tugging at my coat. It was over. The man who tried to erase me was gone. But as I walked away, a strange emptiness settled in my chest. For years, my life had been defined by survival, by vengeance. Now, with the war won, I faced a new question. Who was I without him? I didn't have the answer yet. But I knew one thing. Whatever came next, it would be mine. For the first time in years, I was free. Freedom tasted bittersweet. The city had moved on, newspapers shifted to the next scandal, and Miles, the man who had consumed so much of my life, was behind bars. But behind the walls of my apartment, silence roared. I spent the first few days wandering through empty rooms, touching the surfaces that had once been his, the shelves he had curated, the furniture he had chosen, the expensive rug he had insisted matched everything. Each object reminded me of the life he had tried to control, to own. And now I could do anything with it. I didn't know where to start. The first step was Daniel. My brother had been my anchor through the storm, the one who never doubted me, never let me falter. We sat together in the kitchen, drinking coffee, the early morning sun painting the room in gold. "You did it," he said simply. I smiled faintly. "We did it." He studied me for a long moment. "And now what?" I didn't answer. Because I didn't know. The trial had consumed me, made me single-minded. Revenge had been a fire, burning through fear and anger, lighting the path forward. But now the fire had burned out, leaving only ash. I decided to leave the city. There were too many ghosts here, too many reminders. I packed what I could carry, leaving behind the mansion, the memories, even the high-rise apartment that had once been a fortress. I chose a small coastal town, far from the glare of the media. The ocean stretched endlessly, a horizon that promised possibilities. It became my therapy. I woke early, walked the beaches, collected driftwood, and let the salt air cleanse me. It was in that quiet that I started to rebuild. First, I reclaimed my identity, not as Ava Sinclair, the betrayed wife, or the woman who faked her death. Simply as Ava. I started small, volunteering at a local shelter, helping women who had been victims of abuse and manipulation. Each story I heard mirrored fragments of my own, and each time I helped, I felt the chains of my past loosen. Then I turned to art. Miles had always scoffed at my sketches, calling them childish. But now I painted. On canvas, I poured every feeling: rage, sorrow, fear, hope. The paintings weren't just art. They were therapy, a visual journal of a life rebuilt. I also rebuilt my relationships. Friends I had lost to fear or manipulation slowly came back into my life. There was cautiousness, sure, but also a newfound respect. They saw me not just as a survivor, but as a force of nature, someone who refused to be broken. Business opportunities arrived too. Companies reached out, intrigued by the woman who had outsmarted a financial predator. I learned to navigate the world differently, smarter, more cautious, yet unafraid. And for the first time, I made choices for myself, not out of fear, but desire. Yet even with all this, nights were the hardest. Dreams of the operating table haunted me, the moment of betrayal, the fear of dying under someone I once trusted. I learned to face them, not as Ava Sinclair, the victim, but as Ava, the survivor. I wrote journals, letters to Miles I would never send, words that turned my pain into strength. Months later, I received a letter from Miles. The prison system had a protocol, allowing him to write one letter a month. His words were empty, filled with anger and failed threats. But reading them didn't scare me. They were proof of the life I had escaped, the chains I had broken. One morning, as the sun rose over the ocean, I walked along the shore and paused. I thought of Daniel, of the women I had helped, of the paintings drying in my small studio. For the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the kind of peace that erased pain, but the kind that acknowledged it, accepted it, and moved forward. Life wasn't perfect. I wasn't perfect, but I was free. And freedom was a fire of its own. Quiet, steady, unwavering. I realized that revenge had been a chapter, not the story. It had been the necessary storm that cleared the path. But the life that followed, this life, was my real triumph. And for the first time, I could say, without fear or hesitation, that I was finally alive.